The billionaire bros trip to Beijing with Trump. So what did we get from last week's voyage?
China appeared not to give the US much, but they need us more than they let on.
But first, Yetis, funny little calculation Jack and I were doing on the weekend. Jack, you want to whip out the whiteboard and share it with the Yetis?
At one point last week, there was almost more money not on Earth than on Earth.
All right, you got to break this down. What do we mean?
Okay, Elon Musk and Jensen Huang were flying on Air Force One with the president.
Okay, and Jack, 17 other CEOs, including Tim Cook of Apple, were on a separate plane trailing Air Force One.
We counted $17 trillion of market cap. 1/3 of the S&P 500's value had their CEOs on those airplanes going to China last week.
That's right. 1/3 of the stock market was 30,000 feet in the air for a few hours there.
I think Satya Nadella from Microsoft was the designated survivor of the situation.
Because, besties, this was an American president's first visit to China since 2017, and it was a highly choreographed affair.
State visits like this are more pageantry than policy, so there were a lot of compliments exchanged publicly.
Yeah, it's more choreographed than like a ballet or a waltz.
The two leaders traded what felt like best man speeches at a wedding during the big dinner on Thursday night.
Except President Xi said the relationship could turn extremely dangerous if the U.S. does something with Taiwan that China doesn't like.
All right, now everybody get out to the dance floor. Let's go.
Let's turn that music on. Hey, DJ, hit it.
But some announcements were made after the Billionaire Bros trip to Beijing.
And Jack and I think you should know them. Speaking of bees, they revolve around the 3 Bs.
Beef, Boeings, and barrels. First, President Trump said that China will buy 200 airplanes from Boeing.
Now, Boeing was hoping for 500 airplane orders, so Boeing stock actually fell 7% last week on the news.
And President Trump said that China will begin buying more American oil instead of just importing everything from the Middle East.
That news, plus no news on the war in Iran, that sent oil prices up 5% higher on Friday into the weekend.
But most complex of all the deals announced in China was beef.
Jack, why don't you sprinkle on some, I was going to say a glaze, but why don't you sprinkle on some beef to the beef?
Last year, at the height of the trade war, China stopped buying as much American steak as they had in previous years.
It was retaliation for tariffs. China started ordering Brazilian beef instead of beef from our Texas ranchers.
But then, last week, as a gesture of goodwill, China took U.S. beef off of their import blacklist.
Okay, but here's the problem. They didn't say how much beef they're actually interested in buying.
And within 24 hours, China reversed the newly approved U.S. slaughterhouses they were planning to import from.
So the president has been touting beef sales to China as a win, but now it is totally unclear after the trip how much beef is actually going to be ordered up.
And we're not even back to pre-trade war norms in terms of beef traded.
And side note, or side dish, beef prices are at all-time highs right now.
If we export more to China, the prices here in the States will rise even more.
So, besties, looking at the Bs here, beef, Boeing, and barrel deals will raise prices for Americans, but they didn't raise Boeing stock.
And that beef over beef kind of encapsulates the entire Billionaires boys trip to China.
A lot of talk, a lot of back and forth, not necessarily progress. So, Jack, what's the takeaway for our buddies looking at the receipts from the Billionaire Bros trip?
China is playing it cool right now. They act like they need us less than they really need us.
Yetis, President Xi of China is known for his patience, his stability, and his long-term focus.
But underneath the carefully controlled surface, China faces bigger economic problems than we do.
Look at oil. 70% of China's oil is imported, so they're hugely affected by high oil prices right now.
Look at youth unemployment. Over 20% of young people in China cannot find a job.
The data was so bad, the Chinese Communist Party stopped releasing it.
And the overall economy? China's share of global GDP has been shrinking for 5 years in a row now.
Add it all up, besties, and China is projecting an image of not needing the U.S. anymore.
And that was on display in their state visit last week.
And President Xi apparently told President Trump that the U.S. is in decline.
But our takeaway from watching last week's show and reading the data is that China's actually just playing it cool.
They actually need us more than they act like they do.